The howling wind threatened to drown out Winifred Foster's desperate pleas as she pounded on the door of her family's home, her knuckles raw and aching. "Please, let me in," she cried, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air of the December night. The snowstorm that had swept across the Texas panhandle had come without warning, catching Winifred unprepared as she returned from delivering food to Mrs. Holloway, an elderly widow in Coldwater, Texas. It was 1885, and winter had descended with unusual ferocity upon the normally temperate region. Winifred's shawl provided little protection against the biting cold, and her thin dress was already soaked through from the relentless snow. She could hear movement inside the house, could see the flicker of lamplight through the frosted windows, but the door remained firmly shut. "Father, please." She called again, her voice breaking. "Mother, Henry." But no response came from within. The realization struck her with as much force as the wind at her back they weren't going to let her in. Her stomach twisted with the knowledge that her father had finally made good on his threats. For months, he had been trying to force her to marry Thomas Blackwell, the banker's son, a man twice her age with cold eyes and cruel hands. When she had again refused earlier that day, her father's face had turned that dangerous shade of purple, and he had warned her that her defiance would have consequences. She hadn't imagined he meant this. With trembling limbs, Winifred stumbled away from the house. The snow was falling so heavily now that she could barely see 2 feet ahead. She knew she couldn't remain where she was. To do so meant certain death in the freezing temperatures. The nearest neighbor lived over 3 miles away, an impossible journey in this weather. Her only hope lay in finding shelter until the storm passed. Winifred wrapped her arms around herself as she pressed forward, her teeth chattering violently. The wind cut through her clothing like knives, and each step became more difficult as the snow deepened. She had no clear direction, only the desperate need to find sanctuary from the storm. How long she walked, she couldn't say. Time lost meaning in the swirling white void. Her feet had gone numb, and her thoughts were becoming sluggish, a dangerous sign, she knew. When she stumbled and fell to her knees, Winifred wasn't certain she had the strength to rise again. But as she lifted her gaze, squinting through the curtain of snow, she saw something that stirred a flicker of hope in her chest, a faint light in the distance. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she forced herself to her feet and pressed onward. The light grew closer, resolving into the warm glow of lanterns illuminating the windows of a modest ranch house. A large barn loomed nearby, and through the haze of snow, Winifred could make out the outline of a wooden gate marking the entrance to the property. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice emerged as little more than a whisper. Her frozen fingers clutched at the gate, but she lacked the strength to open it. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Winifred collapsed against the wooden structure, her consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. Yorick Kincaid added another log to the fire and rubbed his hands together, grateful for the warmth of his home as the storm raged outside. At 32, he had spent enough winters on the frontier to recognize when a storm meant business, and this one had all the makings of a killer. He'd spent the afternoon securing his livestock and ensuring his provisions would last through what might be several days of isolation. The howling of the wind had become almost hypnotic when another sound cut through it, the distinct bark of his cattle dog, Rusty. The animal was at the door, pawing frantically and looking back at Yorick with urgent eyes. "What is it, boy?" Yorick rose from his chair, frowning. Rusty wasn't one to raise a fuss without cause. The dog barked again and scratched at the door. Yorick grabbed his heavy coat from its hook and pulled it on, then wrapped a woolen scarf around his neck. "This better be important," he muttered as he lit a lantern and opened the door. The blast of cold air that hit him was enough to steal his breath, but Rusty didn't hesitate, bounding out into the snow and racing toward the front gate. Holding the lantern high, Yorick followed, cursing as the snow soaked through his pants. When he reached the gate, the lantern's light fell upon a crumpled form half buried in the rapidly accumulating snow. For a moment, he thought it might be an animal, but then he caught sight of a pale hand and the fabric of a woman's dress. Good Lord! Yorick rushed forward, kneeling beside the motionless figure. He brushed away the snow to reveal the face of a young woman, her skin blue-tinged and her lips nearly purple. He pressed his fingers to her neck, relieved to find a faint pulse. With no time to waste, he set down the lantern and gathered the woman into his arms. She was light, too light and dangerously cold. Rusty led the way back to the house, and Yorick followed as quickly as he could through the deepening snow. Once inside, he kicked the door shut behind him and carried the woman directly to the fire. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, but she gave no response. Yorick knew the dangers of severe cold. He'd seen men lose fingers, toes, even their lives to winter's merciless grip. Acting quickly, he retrieved blankets from his bedroom and began the process of warming her. He removed her snow-soaked outer garments, his movements efficient and respectful, then wrapped her in the blankets and positioned her close to the fire. He chafed her hands between his, trying to restore circulation, and pressed a cup of warm water to her lips when her eyelids began to flutter. "That's it," he encouraged. "Come back now." Winifred's first sensation upon waking was warmth, blessed, wonderful warmth. It seemed to flow into her from all directions, gradually banishing the deathly cold that had gripped her. She heard a voice, deep and gentle, urging her to drink, and she obeyed instinctively, the warm liquid soothing her parched throat. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she found herself looking into the concerned face of a stranger. He had a strong jawline covered in a neatly trimmed beard, and his eyes were a deep shade of brown that reminded her of polished wood. Those eyes widened slightly when they met hers. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his tone. "I was starting to worry." Winifred tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat, triggering a coughing fit. The man supported her, holding her steady until the spasm passed. "Easy now," he said. "You've been through quite an ordeal." "I'm Yorick Kincaid. This is my ranch you found yourself on." "Winifred," she managed. "Winifred Foster." "Miss Foster," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "What in heaven's name were you doing out in a storm like this? It's no night for anyone to be abroad, least of all a young woman alone." The memory of her family's closed door, of her father's final warning, flooded back, and Winifred felt tears well in her eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to show such weakness before this stranger, no matter how kindly he seemed. "I had no choice," she said, her voice stronger now. "I was locked out." Yorick's brows drew together. "Locked out, in this weather." He looked as though he might say more, but instead rose to his feet. "You need something hot inside you. I've got stew on the stove." As he moved away to ladle the stew into a bowl, Winifred took stock of her surroundings. The house was modest but well kept, with simple, sturdy furniture, and a few personal touches: a bookshelf filled with volumes, a guitar leaning in one corner, a collection of carved wooden animals on the mantelpiece. It was the home of a solitary man, but not an uncivilized one. Yorick returned with the stew and a chunk of bread. "Can you manage?" he asked, offering the bowl. Winifred nodded, though her hand still trembled slightly as she accepted it. The first spoonful of the hearty stew sent warmth spreading through her chest, and she couldn't suppress a sigh of contentment. Yorick settled in the chair opposite, watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. When you're feeling up to it, Miss Foster, perhaps you might tell me how you came to be at my gate in the middle of a blizzard." Winifred hesitated. Her situation was humiliating, and she had been raised never to speak ill of her family, especially to strangers. But this man had saved her life, and she owed him some explanation. "My father," she began, eyes fixed on the stew, "has been trying to arrange a marriage for me. The man he chose, I could not accept him. Tonight, when I returned from visiting a neighbor, I found myself barred from my home." She lifted her gaze to meet Yorick's. They knew what they were doing. They knew what night it was. Anger flashed across Yorick's features, quickly controlled but unmistakable. "That's not the action of a father," he said, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. "That's the action of a tyrant." His blunt assessment startled Winifred. No one in Coldwater would dare speak so plainly about Henderson Foster, one of the most prominent men in the county. "They likely thought I would surrender and agree to the match," she said. "They didn't count on the storm becoming so severe so quickly." "Or perhaps they did," Yorick replied grimly. "Either way, you're safe now. You can remain here until the storm passes. I have a spare room you can use." Relief washed over Winifred. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "There's no debt between neighbors in need," he said simply. "And out here, we're all neighbors against the elements." After finishing her meal, Winifred found herself overcome by exhaustion. Yorick showed her to a small but tidy bedroom, providing her with one of his shirts to sleep in since her dress was still damp. "It's not proper," he acknowledged, "but it's warm and dry. I'll have your things ready for you by morning." Too tired to protest, Winifred accepted the garment with a murmured thanks. Once alone, she changed quickly and climbed into the bed, which had been warmed with heated bricks wrapped in flannel. As she drifted toward sleep, the howling of the wind outside seemed less threatening now, muted by the solid walls of Yorick Kincaid's home and the knowledge that, at least for tonight, she was safe. Morning brought a transformed world. Winifred woke to sunlight filtering through the window, though the glass was frosted over in intricate patterns. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings causing a spike of alarm until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up slowly, relieved to find that most of her strength had returned. Her dress, now clean and dry, had been draped over a chair near the door. After dressing, she cautiously made her way to the main room where she found Yorick already awake and cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he greeted her. "How are you feeling?" "Much improved," Winifred replied. "Thanks to your care," he nodded, seemingly satisfied with her recovery. "The storm has passed, but we've got nearly 3 feet of snow on the ground." "I'm afraid you'll be my guest a while longer, Miss Foster." Winifred moved to the window, gazing out at the pristine white landscape. The snow glittered in the morning sun, beautiful but imposing. "I've imposed on you enough already." "It's no imposition," Yorick assured her. "I don't get many visitors, especially in winter. The company is welcome." He hesitated, then added, "Though I should warn you, tongues may wag if word gets around that you've stayed here unchaperoned." The thought hadn't occurred to Winifred, but he was right. In a place like Coldwater, reputations could be ruined over far less. Still, given the choice between social disgrace and freezing to death, the decision wasn't difficult. "I believe survival takes precedence over propriety in this case," she said with more confidence than she felt. A smile tugged at the corner of Yorick's mouth. "A practical view, I approve." He gestured to the table, where plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits awaited. "Eat. Then perhaps you can tell me more about yourself and this marriage your father was so set on." Over breakfast, Winifred found herself sharing details of her life that she had rarely spoken of to anyone. She told Yorick about growing up as the only daughter among 5 children, about her mother's declining health and her father's increasing bitterness, about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday, dreams her father dismissed as foolish fancies. "And then there's Thomas Blackwell," she said, her appetite diminishing at the mere mention of his name. "The banker's son. Father owes him money, a lot of money, I suspect. A marriage would settle the debt and elevate our family's standing." "At the cost of your happiness," Yorick observed. Winifred nodded. "Father says happiness is a luxury we can't afford, but Thomas—" She shuddered. "There's something wrong about him, the way he looks at me like I'm a piece of property he's appraising." Yorick's expression darkened. "I know the type. Men who see women as possessions rather than people." "You don't share that view?" Winifred asked, curious. "My mother would have tanned my hide if I ever treated a woman with anything less than respect," Yorick said with a wry smile. "She raised me alone after my father died, ran this ranch with nothing but grit and determination until I was old enough to take over. Taught me that strength comes in many forms, not all of them obvious." Something in his tone made Winifred look at him more closely. There was a quiet dignity about Yorick Kincaid, a thoughtfulness that set him apart from the men she had known in town. He wasn't classically handsome, perhaps, but his features were striking in their honesty, eyes that met hers directly, a mouth that smiled easily but not falsely. "What about you?" she asked. "How long have you been here alone?" "5 years now," he replied. "My mother passed in '80. I had a ranch hand until last spring, but he moved on to California. Been managing on my own since then." He glanced around the house. "It's not much, I know, compared to what you're used to." "It's a home," Winifred said softly. "A real one. That's worth more than grand furnishings or fancy trappings." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of recognition, of understanding. The moment was broken by a bark from Rusty, who had been dozing by the fire but now trotted to the door, ears perked. "Someone's coming," Yorick said, rising from his chair and moving to the window. He peered out, then turned to Winifred with a grim expression. "It's a group of men on horseback. 7 of them, and they're armed." Winifred felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "My father," she whispered. "He must have sent men looking for me." Yorick's jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he instructed, reaching for his coat and hat. "Let me handle this." Before Winifred could protest, he had strapped on a holstered revolver and stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Through the window, she watched as he strode through the snow toward the approaching riders, his posture straight and unafraid. The men halted at the gate, and even from a distance, Winifred could see that they were not mere farmhands or laborers. These were hard men, the kind her father sometimes employed for tasks he preferred not to speak of openly. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across one cheek, dismounted and exchanged words with Yorick. Though she couldn't hear what was said, the tension in both men's stances was evident. The conversation grew more heated, with the scarred man gesturing forcefully while Yorick stood his ground, one hand resting casually near his holstered weapon. After several minutes, the scarred man spat into the snow, remounted his horse, and signaled to the others. They turned and rode away, casting dark glances back at the ranch house as they departed. When Yorick returned, his expression was thunderous. "Your father didn't send them," he said without preamble. "They work for Blackwell." Winifred sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "What did they want?" "They claim you're Blackwell's betrothed, and that you've been abducted." Yorick's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They demanded I turn you over to them immediately." "And you refused," Winifred said, both grateful and afraid. "I told them there was no betrothed woman here, just a neighbor I'd rescued from the storm." Yorick removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. They didn't believe me, but they weren't ready to force the issue. Not yet, anyway. They'll be back, Winifred said, certainty in her voice. Thomas doesn't give up easily when he wants something. Let them come, Yorick replied with quiet determination. This is my land, my home. I don't take kindly to threats. Winifred looked at him with newfound admiration. Here was a man standing against 7 armed thugs for the sake of a woman he barely knew. I can't ask you to put yourself at risk for me. You didn't ask, he pointed out, and I'm not in the habit of handing over women to men who clearly mean them harm. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for far too long. Thank you, she said simply. Yorick nodded, then seemed to make a decision. We should prepare for their return. They'll likely wait until the snow melts enough to make travel easier, a few days at most. The next several days fell into an unexpected rhythm. With Winifred unable to leave and visitors unlikely due to the snow, she and Yorick found themselves sharing the small ranch house in a domestic arrangement neither had anticipated. Winifred took over much of the cooking, discovering to her surprise that she enjoyed the task when it wasn't demanded of her as a duty. Yorick taught her how to make bread the way his mother had, crusty on the outside, soft within, and praised her efforts with genuine appreciation. In turn, she helped with the daily chores, feeding the chickens that were kept in a coop attached to the barn, and assisting with the care of the few cattle Yorick had managed to bring into the shelter before the storm hit. Their conversations flowed more freely with each passing day. Yorick told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand his herd in the spring, and his love of books, a passion they discovered they shared. Winifred spoke of her desire to see more of the world than just Coldwater, of her secret collection of newspaper clippings about faraway places, and of the joy she found in teaching her younger brothers to read despite her father's disapproval. On the 3rd evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Yorick brought out his guitar and, after some coaxing from Winifred, began to play. His fingers moved deftly over the strings, and when he sang in a rich baritone, Winifred felt something stir within her, a yearning she had never allowed herself to acknowledge before. That was beautiful, she said when the last note had faded. Where did you learn to play like that? My father, Yorick replied, his expression softening with memory. He wasn't much for farming or ranching, truth be told. Might have been a musician if life had dealt him different cards, but he made sure I knew how to play before he passed. He would be proud, Winifred said, meaning it. Yorick looked at her for a long moment, the firelight casting his features in warm gold. What will you do? He asked suddenly. When the snow melts and the roads clear, will you return to your family? The question had been weighing on Winifred's mind, though she had tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the unexpected peace she had found in this remote ranch house. I don't know, she admitted. My family doesn't want me unless I agree to marry Thomas, and I won't do that. You could go elsewhere, Yorick suggested. Start fresh in another town. With what? Winifred asked, a touch of bitterness creeping into her voice. I have no money of my own, no skills that would earn me a living. You're educated, Yorick pointed out. You could teach as you wanted to. Women teachers are expected to be above reproach in their personal conduct, Winifred countered. If word spreads about my time here unchaperoned with a man I'm not related to, no school board would hire me. Yorick frowned, acknowledging the truth of her words. Then what options remain? Winifred gazed into the fire, watching the flames dance. Few that I can see, becoming someone's housekeeper perhaps, or marrying quickly before my reputation is entirely ruined. Is that what you want? Yorick's voice was carefully neutral. A hasty marriage to escape your circumstances. No, Winifred said softly. What I want She trailed off, uncertain how to express the longing that had grown in her heart over these few days. "What do you want, Winifred?" Yorick pressed, setting aside the guitar and leaning forward. She met his gaze, finding courage in the warmth she saw there. "I want a life that's mine to shape. I want a home where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide or represent. I want—" She hesitated, then finished in a near whisper, "I want what I've glimpsed here. Respect. Partnership. Maybe even happiness." Something shifted in Yorick's expression, a mix of surprise and what might have been hope. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a sound from outside interrupted the moment, the distant but unmistakable report of a rifle shot, followed by the panicked lowing of cattle. Yorick was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his gun belt. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "Bar the door behind me." "What is it?" Winifred asked, rising as well. "Trouble," was all he said before he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Winifred did as instructed, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place across the door. Then she moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the outline of the barn and the corral beyond. Shadowy figures moved near the edge of the property, and another shot rang out, followed by a cry of pain that made Winifred's blood run cold. Without thinking, she grabbed Yorick's spare rifle from its rack on the wall. Her brothers had taught her to shoot years ago, in secret afternoon sessions when their father was away on business. She checked that the weapon was loaded, then moved to the back door, slipping out quietly into the night. The snow had melted considerably over the past days, but it was still deep enough to make movement difficult. Winifred stayed close to the house, using its shadow for cover as she tried to determine what was happening. She spotted Yorick crouched behind the water trough, exchanging fire with at least 3 men who had taken positions around the corral. Even as she watched, one of the attackers moved to flank Yorick, approaching from his blind side. Without hesitation, Winifred raised the rifle and fired, her shot going wide but startling the would-be ambusher enough that he dove for cover, giving Yorick time to spot the threat and adjust his position. Yorick's head whipped around at the sound of her shot, his eyes widening when he saw her. He gestured urgently for her to get back inside, but it was too late. One of the attackers had spotted her as well and was now moving in her direction. Heart racing, Winifred retreated toward the house, but her foot caught in a drift, sending her sprawling into the snow. The rifle slipped from her grasp, landing just out of reach. As she scrambled to retrieve it, a dark figure loomed over her. "Well, well," said a familiar voice that turned her blood to ice, "if it isn't my reluctant bride." Thomas Blackwell stood before her, a pistol in his hand and a cruel smile on his thin lips. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his costly coat stained with mud and snow, but the arrogance in his pale eyes was unchanged. "I'm not your bride," Winifred said, forcing defiance into her voice despite the fear gripping her chest. "I never agreed to marry you." "Your father did," Thomas replied dismissively, "and that's all that matters. A daughter's obedience is expected." He reached down and grasped her arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. "Now, you're coming with me before that cowboy gets any more ideas about playing the hero." "Let her go, Blackwell." Yorick's voice cut through the night, steady and dangerous. He stood a few yards away, his revolver trained on Thomas with unwavering precision. Thomas's grip on Winifred's arm tightened painfully as he shifted to use her as a shield. "This doesn't concern you, Kincaid. The woman is my property." "She belongs to no one but herself," Yorick countered. "And on my land I make the rules." His gaze flicked briefly to Winifred. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her arm throbbed where Thomas's fingers dug into her flesh. "How touching," Thomas sneered. "The cowboy and the merchant's daughter. A perfect match except for the fact that she's promised to me." He pressed the barrel of his pistol against Winifred's temple. "Drop your gun, Kincaid, or I'll ensure no one has her." Time seemed to slow as Winifred watched indecision flicker across Yorick's face. If he surrendered his weapon, they would both be at the mercy of Thomas and his men. If he didn't, making a swift decision, Winifred went limp, dropping her full weight suddenly against Thomas's grip. Caught off guard, his hold loosened just enough for her to twist free and drop to the ground. The instant she was clear, Yorick fired. Thomas cried out, his pistol flying from his hand as blood bloomed across his shoulder. He stumbled backward, shock and rage contorting his features. Winifred scrambled toward Yorick, who kept his gun trained on the wounded Thomas while scanning the area for the other attackers. "My men will kill you for this," Thomas hissed through clenched teeth, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Your men have run," Yorick replied calmly. "Seems they value their lives more than your money." It was true the gunfire had ceased, and in the distance, Winifred could hear the sound of horses galloping away. "This isn't over," Thomas warned, his face pale with pain and fury. "You've made powerful enemies today, Kincaid, both of you." "Get on your horse and ride out," Yorick instructed, his voice hard. "And don't come back unless you want to leave in a pine box." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might refuse, but the steady aim of Yorick's revolver and the determination in his eyes must have convinced him of the futility of further resistance. With a final venomous glance at Winifred, he staggered toward his horse, which was tethered at the edge of the property. Only when Thomas had mounted and ridden away did Yorick lower his gun. He turned to Winifred, concern etched into every line of his face. "Are you all right?" "I told you to stay inside." "I saw him trying to flank you," she explained, trembling now that the danger had passed. "I couldn't just watch." Yorick's expression softened. He holstered his weapon and reached out, gently brushing snow from her hair. "You might have saved my life," he acknowledged. "Though I wish you hadn't risked yours to do it." The tenderness in his touch, the worry in his eyes, and the events of the night combined to break something loose inside Winifred. Tears welled up and spilled over, and she found herself sobbing against Yorick's chest as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you." They stood like that for what seemed like a long time, the cold forgotten as they clung to each other beneath the vast, star-filled Texas sky. When Winifred's tears finally subsided, she pulled back just enough to look up at Yorick's face. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yorick's gaze was steady, his answer simple. "That's for you to decide." The night's events marked a turning point. With Thomas Blackwell's attack, any possibility of Winifred returning to her old life in Coldwater vanished like morning mist under the Texas sun. Her family had made their choice when they closed their door against her. Now she would make hers. The following day, as they assessed the damage from the attack, one cow dead, another injured, and a section of fencing destroyed, Winifred found herself working alongside Yorick with a sense of purpose she had rarely experienced before. Her hands, once prized for their delicacy and skill with embroidery, now wielded tools and hauled water with growing confidence. "You're a quick learner," Yorick observed as she finished securing a loose board on the corral. "Most town-raised folks would balk at half the chores you've taken on." Winifred wiped sweat from her brow, surprised to find satisfaction in the physical labor. "Perhaps I was never meant for town life," she said. "Or perhaps it's the company that makes the difference." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. Since that moment in the snow when he had held her, Something had shifted between them, a boundary crossed, though neither had yet put words to the change. As they worked to repair the damage, Yorick told her more about his plans for the ranch. He had been saving to expand, to build a larger house come spring to increase his herd. A man needs something to work toward, he explained. A future to build. And what does that future look like to you? Winifred asked, genuinely curious. Yorick paused, hammer in hand, his gaze distant. Until recently, I saw it clearly enough: more cattle, more land, perhaps hiring a couple of hands to help manage it all. He glanced at her. Now I find my vision shifting. The implication in his words sent a flutter through Winifred's chest, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of a rider, Sheriff Malcolm Turner, from the neighboring town of Oakridge. Kincaid, the sheriff greeted, dismounting with the stiffness of a man who'd ridden far. He nodded to Winifred, curiosity in his weathered face. "Madam." "Sheriff," Yorick acknowledged, setting down his tools. "What brings you all the way out here after that storm?" "Reports of gunfire," Turner replied bluntly. "And a complaint filed this morning by one Thomas Blackwell, claiming you shot him while he was attempting to retrieve his betrothed." His gaze settled on Winifred. "I'm guessing that would be you, miss." Winifred straightened her shoulders. "I am Winifred Foster, but I am not, nor have I ever been, betrothed to Thomas Blackwell." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That's not the story Blackwell's telling. He says your father arranged the marriage and that Kincaid here abducted you during the storm." "That's a lie," Yorick said, his voice hard. "Miss Foster was locked out of her home in the blizzard. She nearly died before reaching my property. I took her in to save her life, nothing more." Turner looked between them, his expression guarded. "And the shooting?" "Blackwell and his men attacked my ranch last night," Yorick explained. "Killed one of my cattle, damaged my property, and threatened Miss Foster's life. I acted in self-defense." The sheriff sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's your word against his, and Blackwell has influence even in Oakridge." "I witnessed everything," Winifred interjected. "Thomas held a gun to my head and threatened to kill me. Mr. Kincaid saved my life." Turner studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, miss. But that doesn't change the fact that Blackwell's father is calling for Kincaid's arrest, and your father is demanding your return." "My father lost any right to make demands when he locked me out to freeze," Winifred said, anger flaring. "I am 20 years old, Sheriff. Old enough to make my own decisions." "The law might see it differently," Turner warned, "particularly given your situation here." He gestured vaguely between Winifred and Yorick, his meaning clear. Yorick stepped forward. "What exactly are you saying, Sheriff?" Turner replaced his hat, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "I'm saying that unless Miss Foster's reputation is protected in the eyes of the law and society, Blackwell's accusations might stick to both of you." Understanding dawned on Winifred. "You're suggesting I need a chaperone? Or a husband?" "I'm suggesting you need to consider your position carefully," Turner replied. "Blackwell isn't the type to let this go, and he has the law and social convention on his side, regardless of the truth." After the sheriff departed, having extracted a promise from Yorick to come to Oakridge within the week to make an official statement, a heavy silence fell between them. They returned to their work, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had been replaced by a tension thick with unresolved questions. It wasn't until evening, as they sat at the dinner table, that Yorick finally spoke what was on his mind. "The sheriff was right," he said, setting down his fork. "Blackwell won't let this go, and your reputation." "My reputation was likely ruined the moment I spent a night under your roof," Winifred replied with forced lightness. "Though in truth, it matters little to me what people think." "It should matter," Yorick insisted. Not for pride's sake, but for your future. A woman alone in this part of the country, without family support or a spotless name, life would be harsh, opportunities few. Winifred met his gaze steadily. What are you suggesting, Mr. Kincaid? Yorick took a deep breath as though steeling himself. I'm suggesting, that is, I'm offering. He faltered, then tried again. What I mean to say is, would you consider marrying me? The question hung in the air between them, momentous in its simplicity. I know it's sudden, he continued when she didn't immediately respond. And I'm not a wealthy man like Blackwell, nor as established as your father might wish. But I can offer you safety, respect, and a home that would truly be yours. In time, perhaps we might even find. He trailed off, seemingly unable to voice the word love. Winifred's heart raced. The proposal was practical, born of necessity, and yet, in the depths of Yorick's eyes, she saw something more than mere practicality. She saw hope, longing, and a promise of the very things she had confessed to wanting just days ago. Is this only because of Thomas's threats? She asked quietly. Because of what the sheriff said, Yorick shook his head. It hastened the asking, perhaps, but the thought was already there. He reached across the table, tentatively covering her hand with his. From the moment you stood your ground against those men, from the evenings by the fire when we talked of books and dreams, from the way you faced every challenge with courage, I knew you were someone special, Winifred Foster. Someone I'd be proud to build a life with. Tears pricked at Winifred's eyes, not of sorrow but of a surprising, overwhelming joy. In just a few days, this man, this kind, honorable, steadfast man, had shown her more consideration than she had known in years. Yes, she said, turning her hand to clasp his. Yes, I will marry you, Yorick Kincaid. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from behind storm clouds, brilliant and full of promise. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a question asked and answered in the press of lips and the mingling of breath. When they parted, Winifred found herself trembling, not from fear but from the intensity of emotions coursing through her. We'll go to Oakridge tomorrow, Yorick said, his voice husky. Find the preacher and make it official before the sheriff has to take my statement. That should settle any legal questions and keep Blackwell at bay. Winifred nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the swiftness of events. Just a week ago, she had been facing a forced marriage to a man she despised. Now, she was freely choosing to wed a man she had known for mere days, yet felt she understood better than anyone in her life before. Are you certain? She asked, needing reassurance not for herself but for him. This is happening so quickly. Yorick's expression grew serious. I've spent 5 years alone on this ranch, Winifred. In all that time, I never once felt the absence of company so keenly as I do now at the thought of you leaving. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. Some things don't need years to be sure of. Sometimes, you just know. The journey to Oakridge the next morning was undertaken with a mixture of determination and nervous anticipation. They traveled in Yorick's wagon, bundled against the cold but warmed by the certainty of their decision and the stolen glances they exchanged along the way. Oakridge was larger than Coldwater, boasting a proper main street with a variety of businesses, a courthouse, and 3 churches. They went first to the Methodist church, where Reverend Simmons listened to their situation with a thoughtful expression. Marriage is not a step to be taken lightly, he cautioned, looking between them, particularly under such pressing circumstances. We understand the gravity of our decision, Reverend, Yorick assured him, but our minds are made up. Reverend Simmons studied them for a moment longer, then nodded. Very well. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon, but first, you'll need to obtain a license from the courthouse." At the courthouse, they encountered their first obstacle. The clerk refused to issue a license without proof of Winifred's identity and age. "Standard procedure," he insisted, though the gleam in his eye suggested he had been forewarned about their arrival. "Is there a problem?" Sheriff Turner's voice came from behind them, and Winifred turned to find him watching the exchange with interest. The clerk straightened. "No problem, Sheriff. Just following protocol." "I can vouch for Miss Foster's identity," Turner said evenly. "And as for her age, I believe her to be of sound mind and old enough to make her own decisions. Isn't that right, Miss Foster?" "Yes, Sheriff," Winifred confirmed, gratitude warming her voice. "I am 20 years old and entering into this marriage of my own free will." With Turner's backing, the clerk reluctantly issued the license, though his sour expression made it clear he was displeased by the turn of events. Outside, Yorick extended his hand to the sheriff. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting your help." Turner shook the offered hand, his weathered face serious. "I've known the Blackwells for 20 years, never trusted them, and a woman being forced to marry against her will doesn't sit right with me, no matter who her father is." He glanced at Winifred. "Are you sure about this, Miss Foster? Marriage is binding." "I'm sure," Winifred said with quiet conviction. "Mr. Kincaid has shown me more respect and kindness in a week than Thomas Blackwell would have shown in a lifetime." The sheriff nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then I wish you both happiness. And Kincaid," he fixed Yorick with a stern look, "I expect you in my office after the ceremony to give that statement. Let's put this business with Blackwell to rest properly." The wedding itself was simple, but meaningful. Reverend Simmons performed the ceremony in the modest church, with Sheriff Turner and his wife serving as witnesses. Winifred wore her best dress, the one she had been wearing when she arrived at Yorick's ranch, now cleaned and pressed, while Yorick had donned a suit that, though slightly too tight across the shoulders, gave him a distinguished air. When it came time to exchange vows, Winifred was surprised by the depth of emotion that welled up within her as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this man who had so unexpectedly become her salvation and her future. Yorick's voice was steady as he made the same promises in return, but his eyes shone with feelings too profound for words. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Simmons concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Kincaid, you may kiss your bride." Yorick's kiss was different this time, still gentle, but with an undercurrent of possession and promise that made Winifred's heart race. They were husband and wife now, bound together before God and the law. After the ceremony, Yorick went with Sheriff Turner to make his statement regarding the incident with Blackwell, while Mrs. Turner kindly took Winifred to the general store to purchase a few necessities, including fabric for new curtains and a proper nightgown. "Marriage changes everything, Mrs. Turner said as they browsed, her voice low and confidential, "especially when it happens so suddenly." "Are you prepared, my dear?" Winifred felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "I believe so," she replied, though in truth, the thought of the wedding night ahead filled her with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Mrs. Turner patted her hand. "Your husband seems a good man, patient. That makes all the difference." She selected a bolt of soft white cotton. "This will do nicely for a nightgown. Simple, but with a bit of lace at the collar, modest yet appealing." By the time they reunited with Yorick and the sheriff, the afternoon was waning. Yorick's expression was grim as he helped Winifred into the wagon. "Blackwell?" she asked, concern tightening her chest. "His father's trying to press charges," Yorick confirmed. "But Turner says my statement, combined with yours and the evidence of damage to the ranch, should be enough to counter their claims. Still, We should be prepared for further trouble. Winifred nodded, accepting this reality of their new life together. Then we'll face it together. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town. Both of them preoccupied with thoughts of what lay ahead, not just the potential conflict with the Blackwells, but the more immediate reality of their first night as husband and wife. Dusk was falling as they approached the ranch, the setting sun painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and pink. Yorick drew the wagon to a halt outside the house, then turned to Winifred with an unexpected smile. "There's a tradition," he said, coming around to her side of the wagon. "The husband is supposed to carry his bride across the threshold of their home." Before Winifred could respond, he had lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, as though she weighed nothing at all. She let out a small gasp of surprise, then found herself laughing as he carried her to the door. "Our home," he emphasized, pushing the door open with his foot and stepping inside. He set her down gently in the main room, which looked different, somehow smaller, perhaps, now that it would be shared, yet somehow more spacious in its possibilities. "I should start supper," Winifred said, suddenly uncertain of how to proceed in this new reality. Yorick caught her hand as she turned toward the kitchen. "Winifred," he said softly, "we don't have to rush anything. I know this isn't how either of us imagined marriage would come about." The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her. "I may not have imagined it this way," she admitted, "but I don't regret it, Yorick, not for a moment." He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Nor do I, but I want you to know that I meant what I said in my vows. I will honor and cherish you, Winifred Kincaid. And that includes giving you time to adjust to all of this." The consideration in his offer touched her deeply. This man, who could have claimed his husbandly rights without question, was instead ensuring her comfort and readiness. It confirmed what she had already begun to feel, that her heart had chosen wisely, even in haste. "Thank you," she said, leaning into his touch, "but I don't think I need as much time as you might imagine." Their kiss this time held none of the restraint of their previous encounters. It was a declaration, a promise, and an invitation all at once. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Yorick rested his forehead against hers. "Supper can wait," he murmured. And so it did, as husband and wife discovered each other in the soft glow of the fire, learning the language of touch and whispered endearments that would become their private communion in the days and years to come. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Winifred marveled at the strange and wonderful path that had led her here, from the desperate cold of a snowstorm to the warmth of Yorick's embrace, from the threat of a loveless marriage to the promise of one built on mutual respect and growing affection. "What are you thinking?" Yorick asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes what seems like the worst thing that could happen turns out to be the beginning of something wonderful," she replied, nestling closer to his side. Yorick pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then I'm grateful for the storm that brought you to my gate, Mrs. Kincaid." "As am I, Mr. Kincaid," Winifred said, smiling in the darkness. "As am I." The first months of their marriage passed in a blend of everyday routine and deepening connection. Spring arrived, melting the last of the snow and transforming the landscape into a carpet of wildflowers and fresh grass. The cattle thrived under Yorick's careful management, and Winifred established a productive vegetable garden beside the house. Their life together wasn't without challenges. True to Yorick's prediction, the Blackwells continued their efforts to cause trouble, spreading rumors in Oak Ridge and attempting to disrupt Yorick's business arrangements with the local merchants. But the couple faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from their growing bond. And it was growing. What had begun as a marriage of convenience and mutual respect had blossomed into something deeper, richer, and more vital than either had dared to hope for. Winifred discovered in Yorick a partner who valued her mind as much as her domestic skills, who sought her counsel on ranch decisions, and who took genuine pleasure in her happiness. Yorick found in Winifred a woman of unexpected strength and adaptability, whose quick wit and warm heart made each day brighter than the last. By summer, they had settled into a rhythm that suited them both. Mornings were for shared work around the ranch, tending to the animals, maintaining the property, seeing to the multitude of tasks that ranch life demanded. Afternoons often found Winifred at her sewing or preserving the garden's bounty, while Yorick worked with the cattle or repaired equipment. Evenings were their time together, for conversation, reading aloud from their growing collection of books, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. It was during one such evening in late August that Winifred finally gathered the courage to share the news she had been confirming for nearly 2 weeks. "Yorick," she began, setting aside the shirt she had been mending, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the ledger where he had been recording the month's expenses, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Are you feeling unwell again?" Winifred smiled, touched by his worry. She had been experiencing morning sickness, but had attributed it to a passing illness to avoid raising hopes prematurely. "Not unwell exactly, but there is a reason for my recent episodes." Understanding dawned in Yorick's eyes, hope and wonder replacing concern. "Are you saying?" She nodded, her own eyes bright with emotion. "We're going to have a baby, Yorick, sometime in early spring if my calculations are correct." The ledger was forgotten as Yorick crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering Winifred into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled Rusty from his nap by the fire. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down with sudden gentleness. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. He placed a hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. "Our child." Winifred covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Yorick said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I never thought, that is, I hoped someday, but so soon." He shook his head, overwhelmed. "It's a blessing, Winifred, a miracle." She leaned into him, absorbing his strength and warmth. "I was nervous to tell you," she admitted. "We've only been married a few months, and there's still so much to do with the ranch." "Nothing is more important than this," Yorick assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We'll make it work. The ranch is doing well, and with the new cattle I purchased last month, we should have a good selling season next year." He pulled back slightly to look into her face. "And we'll need to start on that larger house I promised you, a proper home for our growing family." The months that followed were filled with preparation. True to his word, Yorick began construction on a new house, a sturdy, 2-story structure adjacent to the original cabin. He hired 2 local men to assist with the building while he continued managing the ranch, determined to have the home completed before winter set in and their child arrived. Winifred, meanwhile, transformed from bride to expectant mother with a grace that belied her initial nervousness. Her body changed, growing fuller as the child within developed, and Yorick found himself captivated anew by her beauty, now enhanced by the glow of impending motherhood. News of their expected child spread quickly through the surrounding area, bringing unexpected reconciliations. Mrs. Turner from Oak Ridge became a regular visitor, bringing gifts of baby clothes and practical advice for the first-time mother. More surprisingly, a letter arrived from Winifred's younger brother Henry, expressing both apology for their father's actions and joy at the news of her marriage and pregnancy. "Father won't speak of you," Henry wrote, But Mother weeps in private, and I believe she misses you terribly. Perhaps, when the child is born, they might be persuaded to meet their grandchild. Winifred read the letter with mixed emotions. The pain of her family's rejection had dulled with time and happiness, but it had never fully healed. The possibility of reconciliation, at least with her mother and siblings, stirred both hope and apprehension. "What do you think?" she asked Yorick after sharing the contents of the letter. Yorick considered carefully before answering. "I think that's a decision only you can make," he said finally. "But know this, whatever you choose, I'll support you. And if you decide to allow them back into your life, they'll have to accept that you're a Kincaid now, with a husband who won't stand for you being mistreated." His protective declaration warmed her heart. "I'll write to Henry," she decided. Not promising anything, but opening the door to possible communication. The rest will depend on their response. By December, the new house was completed, a testament to Yorick's determination and skill. It was larger than the original cabin, but retained the same sense of warmth and comfort that had made their first home so special. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs, a spacious kitchen and dining area, and a sitting room with built-in bookshelves that Yorick had designed specifically with Winifred in mind. "It's perfect," she breathed as he gave her the grand tour on the day they moved in. Her hand rested on her now prominent belly as she took in the evidence of his labor and love. Absolutely perfect. Yorick's expression was a mix of pride and something deeper, more profound. "I wanted to give you and our child a proper home," he said. "A place worthy of the family we're building." Winifred reached for his hand, placing it where their baby was kicking vigorously. "This is home," she said simply. "Wherever we're together." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing shorter days and longer nights spent in the comfort of their new home. Winifred's pregnancy progressed without complications, though as her due date approached, Yorick grew increasingly anxious about her welfare. "Perhaps we should send for the doctor from Oak Ridge to stay with us," he suggested one evening as they sat before the fire. "Just until the baby comes." Winifred smiled at his concern. "Mrs. Turner has already promised to come when the time is near. She's delivered dozens of babies in her time, Yorick. Between her and you, I'll be well cared for." "Me?" Yorick looked alarmed. "I don't know the first thing about birthing babies." "You delivered that calf last spring without any trouble," Winifred teased. "How different could it be?" His expression of horror made her laugh, easing the tension that had been building as they approached this momentous change in their lives. The baby, however, had its own timetable. 2 weeks before Winifred's expected due date, she woke in the middle of the night to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. "Yorick," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." He was instantly alert, sitting up and lighting the bedside lamp. "Now, but it's too early." "Babies come when they're ready," Winifred replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest. "And this one is ready now." What followed was a night that tested both their strengths and revealed depths of courage neither had known they possessed. With the nearest doctor a day's ride away and Mrs. Turner unable to reach them due to a sudden ice storm, Yorick found himself in the position he had most dreaded, sole attendant to his wife's labor. But as the hours passed and Winifred's pain intensified, he discovered a reservoir of calm determination within himself. He boiled water, prepared clean linens, and stayed by her side, offering comfort and encouragement through each contraction. "You're doing wonderfully," he assured her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Just a little longer." Winifred gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave me," she gasped between pains. "Never," Yorick promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. In that moment, he knew he would walk through fire for this woman, would face any danger, overcome any obstacle to keep her and their child safe. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the new snow with hues of pink and gold, a different sound joined the morning chorus, the lusty cry of a newborn taking its first breath. "A boy," Yorick announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped their son in the soft blanket Winifred had prepared. "We have a son, Winifred, a perfect, beautiful son." He placed the tiny bundle in her arms, watching as she gazed down at their child with a love so powerful it seemed to illuminate her from within. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tracing a finger along the baby's delicate cheek. "Welcome to the world." Yorick sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Winifred's shoulders, his heart so full it felt as though it might burst. "What shall we call him?" he asked. Winifred looked up at her husband, her eyes shining with exhausted joy. "I was thinking, James, after your father." Tears welled in Yorick's eyes. "James," he repeated, testing the name. "James Kincaid. It's perfect." As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating the three of them in a golden glow, Yorick felt a sense of completion he had never known before. From the moment Winifred had appeared at his gate, shivering and desperate, his life had been transformed not just by her presence, but by the love that had grown between them, steady and true as the changing seasons. "I love you," he said, the words inadequate to express the depth of his feelings but necessary all the same. "Both of you, more than I ever thought possible." Winifred leaned against him, their son nestled securely between them. "And we love you," she replied, "our protector, our home." Outside, a new day dawned on the ranch, promising challenges and joys yet to come. But within the walls of the house Yorick had built with his own hands, within the circle of his embrace, Winifred knew she had found what she had always sought a place to belong. A love freely given and returned, and the family she had created not from duty or obligation, but from choice and devotion. From the darkness of that snowstorm had come the greatest light of her life. And as little James slept peacefully in her arms, Winifred silently thanked the twist of fate that had led her to Yorick Kincaid's gate on the coldest night of the year, and to the warmest welcome of her life. In the years that followed, the Kincaid ranch flourished, as did the family that called it home. James grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's quick wit. 2 years after his birth, he was joined by a sister, Emma, whose arrival was attended by Mrs. Turner as planned, much to Yorick's relief. The ranch expanded as well, with Yorick purchasing adjacent land and increasing his herd until the Kincaid brand was recognized throughout the county as a mark of quality. Winifred, not content to be solely a wife and mother, established a small school in one of the outbuildings, teaching not only her own children but those of neighboring ranchers who would otherwise have gone without education. Relations with the Foster family improved gradually. Winifred's mother eventually defied her husband to visit her grandchildren, a reunion that brought healing to old wounds. Henry became a regular visitor to the ranch, forming a close bond with Yorick, who taught him ranching skills his father had never bothered to share. Even Winifred's father mellowed somewhat with age, though he never explicitly acknowledged the wrong he had done in casting out his daughter. As for the Blackwells, they eventually left the area after Thomas's involvement in a bank fraud scheme came to light, removing the last shadow from the Kincaids' happiness. On the 10th anniversary of the night Winifred had appeared at Yorick's gate, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with Rusty's descendants, 2 energetic puppies that James and Emma had raised from birth. "Do you ever wonder," Yorick asked, his arm around Winifred's waist, "what might have happened if there hadn't been a blizzard that night? If your family hadn't locked you out?" Winifred considered the question. "I think we would have found each other somehow," she said finally. "Perhaps not as quickly or as dramatically, but some paths are meant to cross, I believe." Yorick smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You always were the romantic one," says the man who built me a house with a special bookshelf and carries me across the threshold every year on our anniversary. Winifred teased. "Caught me there," Yorick admitted with a chuckle. "Though I maintain it was purely practical. Couldn't have my pregnant wife tripping on the doorstep, could I?" Their laughter mingled in the crisp air, a sound as familiar and cherished as the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a desperate knocking on a door during a snowstorm and had become a legacy of love, perseverance, and the enduring warmth of a home where everyone belonged. In the end, what had seemed like the cruelest act, being locked out in the cold, had led Winifred to the greatest blessing of her life. And though she would never thank her father for his harshness, she had long ago forgiven him, understanding that without that moment of darkness, she might never have found her way to the light, to Yorick, to their children, to the life that had been waiting for her all along, just beyond an unexpected gate in the midst of a winter storm.